So, as part of my work to help people recover from chronic fatigue, long COVID, and fibromyalgia, I often get objections to the type of mind body principles which I put forward. And in this video, I just want to go through some of these objections and handle them one by one. So, hopefully, this can reach a greater number of people and will kind of remove obstacles which you may have to trying these therapies. So, objection number one, I don't need emotional healing because I'm not stressed. So I talk a lot about mind body and about relaxing the nervous system, and that's kind of equated to day-to-day stress. Now, don't get me wrong, day-to-day stress is kind of significant. It does significantly impact your health. But when we talk about stresses in the mind body sense, we're not talking about day-to-day stress necessarily. We can also talk about embodied stress, about stress which is almost metaphorically, of course, but stored within your nervous system. And as you start to practice these therapies, you will start to notice huge releases often, and this is stress which you've embodied over the course of your life. And that's the kind of stress which leads to negative coping behaviors and personality patterns, which may cause our day-to-day stress. So while I'm not excluding day-to-day stress, but I am saying that this is a lot bigger than that. We're talking about a kind of whole emotional package which has been with you for your whole life, which has been encoded into your body, into your physiology, into your brain, and which takes significant practice and awareness to overcome. Now, objection two, I don't need emotional healing because I didn't experience childhood trauma. Now, a lot of people just say, I'm basically fine. I'm a happy-go-lucky person. I just got unlucky enough to get, for example, long COVID, and now I'm not feeling well. I have no energy, but I don't have any emotional problems. I'm fine. And to this, I would say, you don't need to experience what many would identify as childhood trauma in order to have a profound amount of stress in your life. So I also, at the beginning of this journey, would have identified myself as someone who was kind of fundamentally okay. But when I started to really scratch the surface and look at my underlying behaviors, I realized there was a lot more in there than I cared to admit to myself even. And that was, for example, in my case, the stressful personality patterns which ADHD brings up in me. For example, hyperfocus, getting absolutely obsessed with a specific project and causing myself some degree of burnout because I desperately need to succeed in that one thing while that is my fixation. That's just a personal one for me. I know a lot of people with chronic fatigue and so on have ADHD, and I believe the link in there is to do with personality. But what I'm saying, I guess, is just because you weren't abused or something as a child does not mean you don't have significant burdens on your nervous system. Really, stress on your nervous system is you can either tolerate it or you can't. And at a young age, even things which maybe most people or many people would think are fairly innocuous, fairly everyday things, can be extremely impactful for you. And if at that stage of your life they exceeded your nervous system's ability to cope, then this can cause a form of trauma. It's not what we commonly talk about as childhood trauma, but it is, as far as your nervous system is concerned, traumatic in that it causes an imprint. It causes maybe a coping mechanism or an avoidance behavior. Everyone has this. So it's not really like to say, I don't have childhood trauma. We're not talking about capital T trauma here. We're talking about small t trauma. And it really does affect everyone. Everyone has negative experiences in childhood which exceed their nervous system's ability to cope. So objection three is, if I say, this can be caused by thoughts alone, it can be cured by thoughts alone, I'm just gaslighting sufferers into saying their condition isn't real. So nothing could be further from the truth. Obviously, I was someone who had chronic fatigue, so and I in no way want to diminish the suffering or the reality of chronic fatigue. I'm not saying it's just stress. I'm not saying it's just in your head. Absolutely not. So it is a real physiological condition. What I am saying is that the mind and the body are one integrated system. And that means what goes on in the mind affects the body and vice versa. And you can't look at one without the other. So your thoughts and your the way you operate on a day-to-day basis and the way you respond to the stimuli in your environment have an enormous impact on everything from your digestion, to your heart rate, to your breathing, everything. this is not a kind of controversial idea. This is mainstream. It's widely recognized in all medical literature that your physiology is changed by your thoughts. Just look at the way you would. What would you do if you got embarrassed? Your face may turn red. Your breathing patterns may change, and these things can become learned behaviors, which are just repeated time and time and time again, and do place a lot of strain on our systems and can prevent us from entering a healing state. So I in no way wish to kind of gaslight sufferers or say that it's not real. It absolutely is real. Just because something has a psychological component does not make it not real. That is the main misunderstanding with mind body medicine, and the thing that I think prevents perhaps the most people from giving it a try. Objection 4. So if you're saying if I just chilled out and thought positively, I'd get better. This goes way, way beyond positive thinking. This isn't just kind of ignore your problems and get on with it. What we're talking about here goes many, many layers deeper. I'm actually primarily talking about embracing that pain, which we often try and avoid, and digging down into that and looking at the absolute foundation of it. Like, what's down there? Why are you doing these things? So approaching it with understanding rather than just saying, think positively, chill out, which does not work. And that kind of positive thinking is not really used nowadays in mind-body healing. Objection 5. There's no evidence supporting mind-body healing for fatigue. Again, this is sort of patently untrue. There are many studies, which I include throughout my courses, which show the huge benefits of various different mind-body strategies, including brain retraining, nervous system balancing, and many more. Obviously, the problem is, given that there's no financial incentive to run absolutely massive placebo-controlled studies, you're not going to get sort of pharmaceutical company level studies into these therapies, simply because there's not the profit there to justify that. There's nothing patentable. There's no patentable drug at the end of the rainbow. And the other thing is, even if you do study these things with mind body, there's so many degrees of uncertainty and subjectivity that it is very hard to study them. But the studies which have been done have been very convincing, albeit fairly small scale in many cases. I think the important thing, though, is that there's by far enough evidence to give this a try, as well as an absolute ton of healing testimonials, or recovery testimonials, should I say, which are in themselves evidence enough to give this a go, especially when there aren't really any or many other options out there for treating chronic fatigue. And I know many of you will already have tried a whole bunch of things like different diets and different medications and so on without success, which is why you've come to this. Objection 6, I should get this advice from a doctor. On this one, I completely agree. This should be part of your national medical coverage, but it's not. And one of my immediate family members waited for a year and a half to be seen by a long COVID clinic in the UK, and got a kind of group online therapy session for about an hour where they talked briefly about CBT and some breathing exercises, and it didn't help her at all. And that's what was available. This was around a year and a half ago, so I don't know what's developed in that time. I sincerely hope it has improved, but I can definitely tell you that they're not looking at the big picture of nervous system health, of brain retraining, and all the other therapies which are out there, of which there are many. So although I completely understand, I really wanted to get advice from someone in a white coat, that kind of authority figure, which I've learned throughout my life to respect and to treat as the person I go to when I'm in trouble, and they heal me. It wasn't available. It wasn't an option. I had to go to more unconventional sources. Like, I recognize that you could consider this course an unconventional source, but I just encourage you to treat this with healthy skepticism by all means, but with an experimental curiosity as well, and to just give these things a try, and not just give them a try, but give them a try very, very consistently. There's not really any risk involved in this. This is merely your time, of which you have a lot. The worst case scenario is that you don't get better, but maybe you help your mindset. The best case scenario is you recover. So you have everything to win and nothing to lose. So although I recognize that, I am not a doctor giving you this advice, you still can benefit massively from these therapies. And I would like to add also that Many of these therapies were created by very forward-thinking doctors like Dr. Gabor Mate and people like that, who are pioneering this type of nervous system approach in the mind-body space. So these are not just kind of therapies which I plucked out of thin air. They're things which I learned from medical experts, often doctors, and then tried on myself, and they worked. Or I've seen them mentioned in recovery testimonial after recovery testimonial. So I hope that helps, and enjoy the rest of the course.